What's up, you guys? This is Devin from CenturyFX Studios, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about how you can amplify the amount of light coming from your strobe or your fill light when you're outside using high-speed sync. Now, as you can see, I'm in the Lightroom module with Jenny, and me and Jenny were on a narrow bridge. As you can see, we probably only have like 4 feet of working room. That's including with me on there and a light off to key left here. Now, even though I have a light off the key left, you can see how the sun is starting to get into the image. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit here. We can already see the image. Let's all be mature. But we're going to zoom in. We can notice that the sun is starting to affect the image. Now we're at 1:1, and we can see that the sun is starting to bleed into the image and make a hard, unnatural looking shadow when we have a controlled light on the scene. And we also have it down here by her feet, just a heavy shadow distracting everything. And up there by her leg, and then we also have it up here by her chest where it's really hitting the white bathing suit that she has on. Now, when you think about all of this stuff, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Devin, aren't you using the FlashPoint 600? Isn't that one of the most powerful strobes? Not the most powerful strobe, but isn't that a hefty bit of power that you can use to overpower the sun? Yes. But you just can't keep shooting at ISO 100 in certain situations. Sometimes you're going to have to raise your ISO. You remember saying, well, Devin, you're in a situation where you have as much light as you possibly need. Why would you need to go up to ISO 320? Well, I went up to ISO 320 in this case to help alleviate the effects of the sun. Now, you have to think about, there's a whole bunch of variables that you have to worry about. Now, I know this image is kind of tight as far as framing. Let's not talk about the framing, and it's close to her feet and it's close to her hands. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the light that's being casted on her body. Now, the ambient light coming from the sun is the most powerful light source in the universe. So how do we use that sun to our benefit without it distracting from our images, and using as much power as we possibly can coming from our flash to help sculpt and light the model? Now, as you can, I already told you, I'm shooting at high speed sync. So yeah, we're at 1/6400th of a second, which is very fast on the shutter speed. And what this is doing is bringing down that ambient light, so you don't have white skies. Also, those white skies will bring in a lot of flare into your lens and stuff like that. So you have to understand how to block the sun away from your lens, especially if your lens loses a lot of contrast when flaring. Then we have an f2.8. That's letting the most amount of light through that lens. This is an old 17. Actually, this is the 24 millimeter STM lens, but that's the most light they can let in. And you know, f-stop controls the flash power and shutter speed controls the ambient. So if my flash power is at 1/1 and that lens is at 2.8, that's the maximum amount of light I can get from that flash based off of the distance that it is from the model. Now, like I told you, we're on this rickety bridge. It's only like 4 feet wide. I got this big Manfrotto stand with this 47.2-inch octabox. There's no way in the world that I'm going to be able to get the light close and then have me do a good composition, and then not having that much room on the bridge to actually get the same look and the same frame that I want going compression with the telephoto lens. So I have to move the light closer to the model, and then I get this result here. Now if we look at the image, now we still have a little bit of a cascade shadow on the back leg back here, but it's not that much. If anything, you can't really even see it. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit of cascade right above the booty here, but it's been mitigated. It's been controlled. It's been dealt with to the point where you're not even really thinking about the sun at this point. I was able to bring the light closer. Now, going back, that's one way to make the flash stronger, the off-camera strobe stronger. But another way to add on to that is to bring your ISO from 100 to 320. That's what I did in the beginning. I brought my ISO from 100 to ISO 320. You might be saying to yourself, well, Devin, why would you bring your ISO from 100 to 320? You have an abundant amount of light everywhere in that image. Well, there's a difference between having a lot of light and having a lot of controlled light. You don't just let the light control your situation. And a lot of times you don't have the luxury of the benefit of the doubt saying, oh, I'll just go out there and see what natural light gives me. Because especially if you're taking pictures of a person or a model or portrait, everything is supposed to be deliberate and everything's supposed to be successfully deliberate. With all that being said, you don't want squinty eyes. You want her back to the sun. And you want to be shooting directly into the sun, which means you need to have a half-decent lens that's not going to flare, give you all that contrast, so on and so forth. But you might be saying, why did you go from 100 to 320 then? Well, even though ISO makes your camera more sensitive to light, you have to understand what light your camera's seeing. That's the big thing. Now let's go back to shutter speed. Shutter speed controls your ambient light. That means it's dumbing down the sun, because the faster you shoot, the less exposure you get. But the exposure from the sun, because the sun is the 100% of the ambient light there. So at 1/6400th of a second, you're not getting a lot of sunlight, which means you get a lot more color in that background. You get a lot more color in that sky. You get a lot more color from the trees and shrubbery from the background, and you get a lot more color on the bridge that we're photographing at. Now you might be saying, what does the f-stop control? Well, the f-stop controls the amount of light from the flash, especially when you're doing high-speed sync. The f-stop is controlling flash power. When you have an off-camera strobe, f-stop controls all that. So if you look at the lens, we're at 35 millimeters. We have the 35 millimeter, or 17 to 35 millimeter f2.8 L lens from a long time ago, probably one of the first ones they made. But at 2.8, that's much light that you can let into that lens. That means that's the maximum amount of light that you can get from your flash. So if your flash is at 1/1 and you're at 2.8 and you brought that light closer to that model, then that means you need to go to your last resort, which is your ISO. You might be saying, well, won't ISO bring up the exposure of the background too? Yes, it will. Only if you can't bring that background exposure down even more with your shutter speed. So if ISO affects both variables, light sensitivity only, which is your f-stop and your shutter speed, which is your ambient light and your flash power light, then you're going to have to affect both. But if you're able to counteract that with shutter speed, then all the rest of that light is just left for the aperture's exposure, which is controlling the flash exposure, whatever the flash is exposing. Therefore, you get more light to your subject and not on the background. I know that got kind of long-winded, guys, but that's pretty much it. You use ISO to add more exposure to the f-stop and not the shutter speed. And even though it's going to go to the shutter speed by default, you just ramp that shutter speed up, and then you will dumb down the exposure from the ambient light and increase the exposure of the model. Now, at the end of the day, guys, you want to make sure you're in control of everything. You have to understand that you don't have that much wiggle room with ISO and f-stop as you do with your shutter speed. You have way more longitude. You have way more room to control on the shutter speed than you do on your f-stop and ISO. So that's another little benefit or another little tidbit of information you need to think about as well. So I'm done with CenturyFX Studios, guys. Thanks for watching this video. I know it's a little bit of an advanced video, especially if you don't do off-camera flash, but that's just my thoughts on off-camera flash and how to amplify the off-camera flash to bring more light, controlled light, to your model and still bring down the exposure of the background.